Shine is one of the most common things people usually notice when they see jewelry. In this video, I'll show you a technique I learned in jewelry school which has gained me a lot of compliments. There are many ways to polish jewelry, and this is one way to do it. Silver is a lot harder to work with when it comes to shine than gold, for example, but with these tips I've got some great results, so enjoy. Here we have a 3D printed and casted bracelet which has a lot of big chunks of channels from the casting. I filed the excess silver away and now we have an even base to start the polishing progress. I will start with sanding paper grit 400, which is quite rough and will create a really nice smooth matte surface. First, I sand across the surface to one direction. Then I sand to another direction, forming a cross pattern while sanding. Lastly, I'll go through the piece with a straightforward motion. Now you can also do this with a micromotor. Micromotor is much faster and better for your hands, but the stick is a bit easier to control in my opinion, with a really slow motion. Both are great and will do the job. Once I've gone through the piece with the grit 400, I'll do the exact same pattern throughout the piece with the grit 1200 and 2400. The number of the grit really doesn't have to be the exactly same, just go from the roughest to the smoothest, and most importantly, don't skip big steps like going straight from 400 to 2400. Now my pieces look somewhat like this and they are ready for the first polish. For the first polish I use green wax, which is a bit harder wax, and I'm using a wheel like this. For the last polish, which happens after soldering, I use orange wax and a bit softer wheel. Sometimes for last I use this very soft wheel without any wax. I polish my pieces mainly with a big polishing machine. It has a lot of power, which is good. Repeat the exact same formula I showed you before, but this time with a polishing machine. And it doesn't matter if I'm polishing a ring, bracelet or earrings, I almost always polish crisscross the piece. And this is what the pieces look after the first polish. They are nowhere near perfect, but that's not the point. The point is to go through the pieces and give them a solid base, not a perfect base yet. And because of that, soldering and everything after that will be easier. Couple words about soldering. I polish all the pieces separately before soldering. For example, if you're making a ring, polish the setting and the band separately before soldering. This is what I imagine all the professionals do. With silver, I always try to use a lot of flux. Silver is tricky to work with because of the fire scale. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try to prevent it, that still appears and it is very frustrating. With the bigger pieces like this, protecting the silver with flux is very important because we don't want to ruin the base we just created. After soldering and acid, if I have a lot of black fire scale, unfortunately I have to start the next round of sanding from grit 400. If I don't see a lot of fire scale, I would start the next round of sanding from 1200. I'll just go through the piece faster than before with grit 1200 and 2400. Because we already have the polished base. I'll go through the piece with the green wax, wash it and take a white paper and look, can I see any fire scale? This practice with white paper is brutal. It will immediately show you if you missed a spot or if the whole piece is covered with black fire scale. And then you just repeat this section as many times as needed. You sand, you polish, you wash, and see if there's any fire scale left. Sometimes this may take many rounds, but it's necessary and worth it. I move on to the orange wax once I don't see any fire scale, and I've gone through all the details of the piece. For example, in this case, sides of the jump rings and hinge. I'll go through these with a little wheel and a green wax. Remember to wash your piece always between the waxes and the wheels. Also, usually finishing touches like hinges are hammered last, but I do them before orange wax in case there is some happy little accidents I need to work with. So when all this is okay, I'll go through the piece with orange wax and a little bit softer wheel. After the last polish, don't use toothbrush to the piece when cleaning. This may also add marks to the surface. Cheap tip is take a damp tissue with some dish soap and rub gently with your hands. Or of course, if you have an ultrasonic cleaner or steam cleaner, use those. If you are happy with the result, but you see some brushes and marks still which you know that are from the wheel, take a really soft wheel with no wax and go through the piece one more time. Or use a polishing cloth to remove those unwanted marks from the wheel. The most important thing in polishing is the better the base, the easier it is to polish. I cannot stress enough how much impact you can have to the outcome just by being persistent with the base work and go through the piece many times. I almost always go through them at least twice, usually 3 or 4 times. Also, the shape of your piece has a very big impact to the outcome. Rings are so much more easier to polish than big flat surfaces. Then on the other hand, you may have some very difficult small slots which are hard to polish. If your piece is very organic, it may be difficult to sand and polish with wheels. For pieces like these, some people use polishing tumblers or magnetic jewelry tumblers, and they are very handy and can give you a very nice finish depending on what you're aiming for. Now for last, I want to give you one more tip which I learned in school. No matter what the finish you are aiming for, matte, shiny, glittery, the base should always be a good polish, and after that, finishing the piece with the wanted surface. Now here is your cheat sheet you can use if you want to try polishing jewelry this way. I hope you find this video helpful. Let me know your best polishing tips in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.